Better now? Hi! Please tell me sound is better now. Yep, good. So I would be speaking to you in Spanish, but as I was saying, today I have a very, very, very good reason not to. Welcome to my 10th Bit Talk, and as you can see here, my guest is none other than Peter Windsor. For those of you who might not know him, which I bet it's all of you already know him, he started his journalism career working at Autosports Magazine, Motorsports Magazine. He also joined Formula One teams such as Williams and Ferrari, getting to be team manager at Williams. He has also worked as a broadcaster for Formula One and holds a YouTube channel in which he does very, very interesting uh, live streamings. And I think you have one for tomorrow about your pre-Baku Grand Prix.
That's right. Yeah. We have a live stream booked tomorrow. Well picked up. Thank you very much, Danny. That's great to know that at least I got one viewer there. That's cool.
You have more than one. Your channel is very, very successful. You should be
Yeah,
really, really
I'm
proud.
very lucky. You know what? Most of my life in racing, whether well, put aside management, I guess, but in terms of journalism, if you like, whether it be TV writing or the internet, I've always just sort of liked talking about the things that I'm interested in, and I've always posed questions to myself that I want to have answers to for my own edification of what is happening at the moment in motorsport. And I'm one of these guys in the world who, when everybody's driving in that direction, I'm always going in the other direction. And so I'm not very good at hashtags. I'm not very good at trending. I don't even follow any of that stuff. I just do my own thing. And I've always, over the years, I've come to realize it's probably because my brain isn't big enough to be able to take into account what everybody else thinks, as well as working out what I think. And for me to always know what I think, at least, even though I'm often wrong, I need to be able to just keep my mind pretty uncluttered and not really follow the trends. And so that's the way I've always worked. And I've been lucky because most people seem to kind of ask the same questions from time to time. And I think, that's how I've always done it. And that's, I guess, how I always will do it.
Yeah, and obviously I think it's working for you. I think it's working very well for you. And yeah, just thank you so much for being here with
Yeah,
us.
no pleasure. No problem at all. So any questions you like, any topics, you let me know and we'll go for it.
Yeah, great. So, I usually just start from the same point.
Yeah.
All my interviews doesn't matter if my guest is a driver, if it's a journalist, anyone. I just ask the same question. Um, when did you fall in love with motorsport? Most particularly Formula One, because it's a Formula One oriented channel.
Well, yeah, you say Formula One, but motorsport is the more accurate thing for me because when I was a kid, of course, Formula One existed, but the rest of motorsport was much bigger than it is today, whether it be Formula Two, whether it be World Endurance Sports Cars, whether it be even Formula Three. And so in my day as a kid, that is, you would actually been quite stupid only to follow Formula One because you would have missed out on a lot of Formula One drivers racing in Formula Two events, for example, or in sports car races, or Can-Am races or Indy. And so I was always interested in every aspect of motorsport, I guess, compared with today's spectrum. And I think that's a healthy thing. And I think it's a shame, a crying shame actually, that Formula One is so much more popular than any other form of motorsport. I mean, I was trying to watch the LMP racing from Barcelona at the weekend, and yeah, there's quite a good site on the internet for them, and you can watch the race was being streamed. But there weren't a lot of viewers, and it was kind of difficult if you were a sort of abstract fan to get in to see what was really going on. And I think that's a shame because you had, for example, you had Juan Pablo Montoya driving there, Grand Prix winner, and yet it wasn't a big story. It wasn't a big story in the sense of the stories that will surround the Baku Grand Prix this weekend. And I think that's a shame. And I don't think it's very healthy, to be honest. I think Formula One, I think the health of Formula One is great, but I don't think it's healthy for motorsport that Formula One is so much bigger than anything else. And I really hope in the future that we can start to get back to where it was when I was a kid. And maybe it will, maybe Liberty might put a lot more effort into IndyCar, for example, and getting American drivers through is a good example. And, if it wasn't for sports car racing, we would have a completely different opinion, would we not, about drivers like Joe Siffert or Pedro Rodriguez or Vic Elford or Brian Redman, because they were absolutely brilliant in their day in sports car races. And they never really, none of them really had great Grand Prix careers in the sense that it matched their sports car career, but only because they didn't have great teams and great cars which they drove. And so, it's a shame now, I think, that we don't have more outside motorsport. I'm kind of digressing, but that's what I do. And in terms of when I started, it was about the age of 10, I guess. I was interested in motor racing from that point onwards. It was very difficult. I grew up in Australia. It was very difficult finding out what was going on, but I didn't really have an urgency to know what was going on. I just went out and started reading books about motorsport, and many of them were about motorsport in the 1930s or 1950s. And so that's where my knowledge came from. And then periodically I realized that there was some motor racing going on in real time, but it was difficult to find out what was happening. And there was no TV showing the motor racing, and I had to rely on magazines that were coming out by ship to Australia, and so I wouldn't know for 6 months who had won a race. I didn't even know the race was on until I read the magazine 6 months later. It didn't matter; it still meant the same thing to me. So I didn't have that immediacy business, and I think that was probably quite a good thing as well, because you spend a lot more time on the detail and the depth of what was happening, and you could think about it rather than just sort of instant news and sound grabs and headlines. So I guess I'm saying I was pretty lucky, I guess, and when I grew up, in the era in which I grew up, I think motor racing was very, very healthy then. And I always wanted to be in motor racing. I had no idea what: flag marshal, mechanic, driver, journalist, photographer. I tried a lot of things, and I was a press officer, media officer, if you want to call it that, at the local racetrack, Warwick Farm, for a couple of years. And I used to work in my school holidays at the motor racing club that organized the racing there. And I was just absolutely thrilled just to be a part of it, even though I was making sandwiches and stamping the letters and cleaning the road cars for the staff. For me, I was a part of motor racing, and that's always been there, and it's still there, really. I love it. I mean, I live in Spain now. I'm not that far from Campos, and I'm kind of got an itch to go up to Valencia and see the Campos team and just hang out with them. I just love hanging out with mechanics, going to lunch with them at the local cafe and chatting about what's going on. And that's what I love about racing. Racing people, I guess. Racing people, and what they love about it is what I love about it. Finding out what they love about it, I think, is what I'm trying to say. So yeah, that's kind of how I started.
uh, Actually, you have mentioned several interesting things with that answer. So I'm gonna throw, my script to the garbage and just uh, and just try to follow up with that. So you talked about watching all the forms of motorsport, not like Formula One, like if you are interested in how difficult it can be to find a place, like not just to watch it, but to understand it. Because as you said, maybe finding a website to watch it is easy, but getting to understand it as a general viewer, it's more difficult. Recently we heard that Formula One Academy will not be broadcasted, if I'm correct, or may not be broadcasted. And I just want to ask, like, what do you think about it? Because it's supposed to bring, visibility to drivers, but at the same time, they're not getting any screen time. Like, you may be able to follow the timing, and I know for a lot of motorsport fans that's enough, because we have been doing that for a long time. Or sometimes while we're watching a race, a world endurance race or Formula One race or Formula Two race, sometimes we're watching live timings, to see for ourselves the pace and everything. But for a lot of people, it's not, and just seeing the numbers, they won't be interested. That's my opinion. But what do you think about it? And what do you think it says, about the whole Formula One Academy
Well,
project?
I mean, the reason Formula One dominates everything, and the reason the Formula One Academy isn't now being televised, and the reason a Formula 3 driver can't get the budget that he needs, even though he has the talent to make Formula One, is because of Bernie Ecclestone and Max Mosley. Absolutely, all the blame is with them. All the credit is with them as well for transforming Formula One into the huge thing that it is. But one of the ways they did that was basically to kill the rest of motorsport and put all the focus into Formula One. And I think obviously that era is over. The Ecclestone Mosley era is over. And now Liberty, I think, well, I not think, I know, are definitely trying to do a lot more to help up and coming drivers and other categories. And it's not going to be a rapid process, because Max and Bernie killed the rest of motorsport over a period of about 25 years. And so you're not going to be able to just suddenly recreate it in 5 years. It's probably going to take 25 years to get it back again to where it should be, to a Lewis Hamilton doing Le Mans, or to a Max Verstappen doing the Indy 500. Those things aren't going to happen overnight, but they might happen in the future. And I think Liberty would like them probably to happen. And not that they own Le Mans, of course, but they might well do something in IndyCar. And I think, ultimately you just got to blame Bernie and Max. There's a lot of stuff out there about how wonderful they were for motorsport, but I think that is one of the most horrendous things they did for motorsport, to kill the rest of motorsport in order just to make Formula One bigger and better all the time. Because you're just taking the icing off the top of the cake all the time, and you're not allowing it to grow. And nothing breaks my heart more than knowing young drivers with enormous talent who never have the chance to race in Formula One. I think it's absolutely heartbreaking. And it doesn't happen in other sports, because in other sports you don't need a £1 million budget for 1 year in order to go racing or play football or hit golf balls. You can go out and do it on your own talent. There's lots of things you can control. And we've never solved that problem. Maybe, I think the W Series and having one make championships like that, and they were well funded with big prize monies, but they were never going to last without commercial sponsorship. And commercial sponsorship was never going to happen unless the TV ratings were large and global. And that was never going to happen so long as Formula One dominated everything. And so it's a vicious circle. How's your cat doing?
she just scared me a little bit.
Good. Well, I've got my dog somewhere, Dexter, as well. I don't know what I think he's having dinner, so he's probably occupied.
Yeah, sorry about that. No, it's really interesting. You know what? Saying that it's not gonna happen. Unless like Formula One, like it maybe doesn't really have to go down. Maybe the other motorsports have to go up, attracting new audiences and all that. But really, apart from putting blame, which of course people are responsible.
It's not blame. It's understanding the reason. And if you understand the reason, you can try and then do something about it. It's not just saying, "Oh, it's their fault. Isn't it terrible?" That is what happens. So let's try and do so. Let's do the opposite now. Let's build up some of the other categories of racing on the back of the success of Formula One. As you say, you don't want to bring Formula One down. You want Formula One to continue to grow, but Formula One should be taking more in its slipstream with it now. And I think it is. And I think Liberty are very aware of that. And I think that that's one of the ways they're going to have to get to a larger audience, and it will happen.
Sorry.
Yeah, she is. He is.
Yeah. Yeah, found her.
Good.
Um, sorry. Yeah, you have talked a little bit about indie, but Liberty Media being interested, or maybe being interested in indie. And that is actually like kind of a rumor, a news that's sparked uh, after one of your streamings or videos. I assume that people, have started talking on Twitter and other platforms about how you said that Liberty was gonna um, try
No, I
to.
didn't say they were going to. I'm saying, it's one of the
Yeah.
things I would imagine they have on the table. And bear in mind,
Oh, okay.
IndyCar is now owned by Roger Penske, who
Mm-hmm.
is a brilliant racer, wonderful man, great guy. He can, I'm sure he would see the logic of how much Formula One and Liberty would like to expand in the United States, and therefore not being at war with IndyCar, at least having some sort of compatible
Yeah.
relationship. Whereas in the Eccleston era, IndyCar was seen as the enemy all the time. And again, that was not healthy. It was ridiculous. When you think about Jim Clark going over to Indy in 65 and winning that race, the first rear engine car ever to win the Indy 500, and he wins the Formula One World Championship in the same year, and then Graham Hill wins it the next year, even though Jimmy really won that race, and so forth. When you think about the history and the heritage of the Indy 500, it was a round of the World Championship in the 50s. And then you got Eccleston at Long Beach in whatever it was, 1982, saying, if Long Beach want to have an IndyCar race, we're pulling Formula One out of Long Beach. That was one of the worst decisions, I think, ever taken in the history of Formula One, to take Formula One away from Long Beach, California. And he did it really out of spite because Chris Pook dared speak to the IndyCar people. In fact, it would have been better for both, would have been better for everybody if they'd had an IndyCar race and a Formula One race. And yet it was all done out of spite. And I think that's, Formula One has suffered a lot of that sort of um, bitterness over the last 30 years in the Eccleston Mosley era. Again, to repeat myself, a lot of good things came from that, particularly under the heading of safety. But in terms of where we are today with the sport and Formula One dominating everything, and there being only one American driver on the grid, I think, there's a lot to answer for, to be honest.
Yeah. And do you think that just to finish that up, so just to be clear, you at no point you stated that they were gonna buy it. You just mentioned that
Mm.
it would be stupid not to have it on their minds, right? To try to kind of like partner with IndyCar to
Yeah, not
coexist.
stupid. I just said, it would be a logical thing to think about, that's all.
Okay, yeah, because
In fact, I think it was one of my viewers that actually asked the question. Not I didn't even suggest it. Somebody said, what do you think about the concept of Liberty possibly buying or having a stake in IndyCar, and IndyCar effectively being some sort of feeder series for Formula One? And I said, I think it's a great idea. I think it's a great shame Colton Herta is not racing in Formula One, to be honest. I think he's really talented driver. And I'm still shocked that he wasn't given a super license. I think that was ridiculous. I
yeah,
think he deserves that. And I think he more than has proved his talent. For anybody who watches IndyCar racing, they would know that.
yeah, okay, fine. Because that was actually one of the questions I was gonna ask you later on
Mm.
about that and how maybe what you said during your streaming, what you meant, and what was written afterwards, and published or tweeted afterwards. Like kind of like people could have gotten lost in translation. They could have just made up their own minds about what you were saying, and that's actually one of the things I wanted to ask you about, like how
Mm.
how these things happen, and where do you think like Formula One journalism is right now compared to where it was when journalism
Well,
was
I can only
written.
speak. Yeah, I can only speak from myself and my own experience and how it used to be and how it is today. I think how it is today is actually much better in a number of ways, particularly that we have things like YouTube channels that anybody can create. and put content onto. We never had that, 20, 30 years ago. And I think that's a brilliant thing. And the FIA do an outstanding job of enabling accredited journalists to effectively set up a virtual media center in wherever they are in the world over the course of a race weekend. And it's absolutely brilliant. So in that sense, I think it's fabulous. I think in another sense, because it's so difficult to talk to real Formula One people about real things unless you're part of a team. And and here I would say if you work for McLaren, it's very difficult to talk to somebody who works for Aston Martin over dinner about life in general. People tend to sort of stick together these days because nobody wants to pass on information because of all that stuff. It is really difficult to know what is going on and to understand the sport as it gets more and more complicated. I mean, it was difficult enough when it wasn't that complicated in the 70s or 80s or 90s. But now, when there's 1,000 people and it's unbelievably complicated, there's much less information out there for the journalists to consume than there was back in the 90s. And that makes the job very difficult. In other ways, I suppose what happens is that they just sort of basically give up trying to understand, and they just live and die on quotes they can get, which are given out by the teams or by chatting online. And that's the way journalism is going now. There aren't many websites or stories or articles out there which don't include lots of quotes from somebody. And yet, when I was a kid growing up, I would read Dennis Jenkinson's Grand Prix reports in motorsport, and there wouldn't be a single quote. It would be a 7,000 word report of one race with not a single quote. It was all detail that he himself was writing about, whether it be the chassis number of the car, the changes that had been made to the engine, whatever it was. And nowadays we live in this quote world of, I suppose what I'm getting around to saying is that if a journalist thinks, let's say, for example, let's say a journalist thinks, I don't really like sprint races in Formula One. I think the tendency is not to say, as a journalist, I don't like sprint racing. This is why I don't like it. What they tend to do, I'm generalizing here, obviously, but what they tend to do is try to get somebody in Formula One to agree with them so they can get a quote saying, Zach Brown, quote, I don't like sprint racing, and that's more of how journalism has gone. That's not my style of journalism because why isn't it my style of journalism? I was trying to think why it isn't, because I'm not afraid, I suppose, to say what I think, and I always have. If I don't like sprint racing very much. I think it dilutes the main event, and I've said that, and I'm happy to say it. I don't need someone to say it for me as such. Equally, people want to disagree with me. I'm quite happy to chew the bone with them and discuss it. But I think that's the problem for journalists today, for young journalists today, is probably the lack of information. And on the one hand, you could say, oh yeah, but look at all the press releases and the statements that are put out by the teams during the race and after the race. But most of it is, doesn't really say very much. It doesn't really tell you why a car is in trouble or slower than another, or why this engineer went in this direction and that engineer went in that direction. It doesn't tell you any of that stuff. It just tells you superficial things that they imagine you're just going to copy and paste into your website. And quite often they do things like, they say things like, we were pleased today to qualify ahead of our regular opponents. Instead of saying, we were pleased to beat Alpha or whatever the reality is, they just talk about all this stuff, our opponents. And, if you think back to Ken Tyrrell or Colin Chapman or any Formula One person with any sort of gravitas, Ken Tyrrell would never say, I was really pleased today that we outqualified our opponents. You'd say, I'm really pleased today that we blew away Ferrari. That's what Formula One's all about. I don't understand why the press releases for the journalists are written in such a way that they think that they're just going to be cut and pasted into some sort of, thing where you can't express yourself or say anything logical. I don't know. I'm kind of rambling a bit, I guess. I suppose I'm saying I think I'm very lucky to be working today in an era when we have so much great technology, but I'm really happy that I lived in an era also when I could hang out in the car park at Monza and talk to Ronnie Peterson and Carlos Reutemann for 2 hours after qualifying about, you know, what they've been doing that day. And you can't do that today, really. So it's kind of Francois Sever. I remember chatting to Francois in South Africa for about 45 minutes about jazz music and piano, and just great guy. Today, there's too many people around. I suppose it's the other thing. Isn't it? There's just too many people. Everybody talks about, isn't it wonderful? Formula One's so huge. And they talk in general, on the news every morning. Oh, this is bigger, or this is down. It's 2% down, or 2% up, or Porsche have sold another 30%, gone up 30% in sales. And I think, well, that's terrible. We don't want Porsche selling lots of cars. They're supposed to be a very, very focused, hand-built car selling in very small numbers. And yet, even Porsche need to sell millions of cars now. Bigger is better. I don't think bigger is better. I never have thought bigger is better. And I don't think having massive numbers of people makes it any easier actually to do the job. It doesn't, makes it worse actually. But anyway, that's just me again.
Do you think
Probably me being a
that's
grumpy old man, I suspect.
and do you think that's one of the things that make Formula One unhealthy? Because you have talked about how Formula One used to be, yeah, just healthier. I don't like,
Well, I talked about motorsport needs to be
yeah,
healthier because there's too much. Yeah, everything is at the top. Everything is around Formula One, and there's nothing around the rest of motorsport. I mean, if you take away all the amateur drivers who just pay a fortune to have a race on a Sunday, with a couple of pros taking over when before he crashes the car or whatever, that's not a very healthy way to run a motorsport series, is it? And the same with Formula Two and Formula Three. Really, I mean, effectively they're relying on very rich dads and mums to pay bills, and that's not correct. I mean, it's very difficult for a Formula Two team to get out there in the marketplace and sell their product, i.e., we race in Formula Two, to commercial sponsors for the sort of money they would need to ask to cover all their costs, because there's not enough television coverage, there's not enough interest. They don't have access to hospitality at the races anyway. They can't even bring guests to the races. So, it's almost a non-sell. So that to me is wrong. And I think Formula One, without in any way affecting the health of Formula One, I think we should be doing more to allow sports car racing, F2 and F3, certainly to grow. The only categories that are I think, remotely healthy are, in IndyCar, you could argue, I guess, and I think they've done a pretty good job there, and I'm sure Roger Penske will continue to do a great job. And the British Touring Car Championship seems to be very good, run by Alan Gow, and he goes completely the opposite way to everybody else. He puts everything out on free-to-air network television, gets the big numbers on television viewing, and as a result of that, he gets the manufacturers and the sponsorship. It's not difficult, but everybody else has a short-term thing of, oh, we got to have paid television, and that reduces obviously the profile of the activity. You get the money in from the TV rights, but is it a long-term solution? That's the big question.
yeah,
I think
I agree on that part because with my friends we have talked several times about when Formula One, like of course in Spain, Formula One was huge when Alonso was, when he won the championships, both of them. Then it declined a lot, and now it's rising again. But
that's
how much different
very
it would
unhealthy.
be? Yeah, but
Well, I
how?
think it's very healthy of a country's love of Formula One to be focused around one driver or two drivers from that country. I mean, Formula One is a great, brilliant sport in a billion different ways. It's not just a nationalistic thing, and that's why things ebb and flow and go up and down, and there's not a consistency to it because there's too much emphasis placed, I think, by the local media on the local driver, and not enough on the sport and everything that's going on. And I suppose, I can only speak from experience in my life. I've never liked or disliked or rated or not rated a driver because of what nationality he has. It's always been on certain things he's done or not done, how good he is, how quick he is, how well he drives, what he does with the car, what he does with the steering. Whether he comes from,
Mm.
Timbuktu or Brazil is irrelevant to me. If I go to Brazil and I see the fans there and I see them getting excited, I think, wow, this is great. I love it. But equally, I think of all the non-Brazilian drivers racing in Brazil and how well they're doing, and they're just as important. So to me, nationalism is not a great thing. I know it's an easy way of building up crowd fervor, but I don't think it's a great thing.
Yeah, but also not just like numbers going up and down because of Fernando Alonso. Of course, I can
Mm,
understand why, but also when Formula One, like it was an open to television, you didn't have to pay to watch it.
mm,
Right now in Spain, you have to pay a platform to
mm.
watch it, and like you cannot access Formula One TV Pro to have another place to watch and have more information. It all goes through this media platform, and how people like they do a lot of things just to get a chance to get another flow of information also, and how
Mm.
those things also like affect the viewers. We have talked a lot of times how you know great it is when El Gran Premio de España, when Spanish Grand Prix comes, because that race will be in open television as well. For the past couple of years, it has been an open television, and each year it's the same talk about how great the numbers are. It's like, yeah, well, maybe if you, well, maybe if you didn't have to go through this specific platform to watch Formula One, it would be even greater, even better, and not just maybe Formula One, also other categories. I remember when W Series, when I watched a couple of races, I had to watch it through autonomic through Catalonian television
Mm.
from a channel from Catalonia, because I could not watch it, through this platform. Or I was just asking, where can I watch the W Series? Where can I watch this competition? And they would say, oh, go to this YouTube channel, go to this Twitch channel. If you want to
Yeah,
see qualifying and if you want to see the race, you'll have to go to
yeah.
this other
Not,
channel to watch it.
yeah, I mean, sadly, that's not just motorsport. That affects a lot of sports now today, and it's a difficult thing. I can only repeat that Alan Gow, in the British Touring Car Championship in the United Kingdom, it's one of the most successful, biggest, and most commercially successful motorsport championships in the world, with a lot of manufacturer participation. And he has always stayed with free-to-air network television. And he went with one of the minority channels, ITV 3 or 4. But it's big, it's really big. People know it's on there, they know it's free, and they go and watch it. And I'm not a television rights expert by any means, and I certainly don't have access to all the numbers in Formula One, but there's certainly a balance to be struck between income from pay television and the benefits of being on free-to-air TV. And I think another problem, it's not a big problem probably, but it certainly should be mentioned, and that is that I don't think the older generation are as able to. I mean, you've described the problems of trying to watch the W Series at your age in Spain. Think of what it's like for somebody in their 70s or 80s or 90s trying to get their head around all these different platforms on which to watch a sport. I speak from experience because my mum is 101 and she loves tennis, and she's absolutely livid that tennis used to be on the BBC in the UK a lot, and now it's all over the place. Amazon Prime, and then it's Channel 4, and then it's somewhere else. And she never knows from one day to the next how it's going to happen. And whenever it's on Amazon Prime, she can't watch it anyway, because in the care home she is, the internet signal's not strong enough to get a proper signal, even though we subscribe to Now TV. We can't even watch it. So I think there's a lot of talk about inequality, but does anybody, when they actually sit down and they do these deals with streaming channels, do they ever sit down and think, hang on, how is a 101-year-old viewer going to access this if they don't have internet and they love tennis? How are they going to watch this? And they don't. Nobody cares. And I think that's pretty sad, actually. I think it's very sad. And, my mum rings me every day wanting to know who won this tournament, who won the fourth round of that, and the fifth round of that, and quarterfinals. And it's out there, but she can't watch it.
It,
Where's the logic in that? It's crazy. And
it, it,
okay, maybe she's the only person in the world in that situation. I don't know, but she's in it, and I'm talking about it now. So there
yeah,
we go.
it kind of feels like when we talked at the beginning of the interview that I also got to talk about that with Bishop, that you would get the news about the race, about any motorsport race, days after it had happened. You talked about months after it had happened because you couldn't get the information faster, and that's
Yeah, I mean, here in Spain, I mean, I love watching the American golf on the Sunday night, the Saturday night, Sunday night. Here in Spain, I mean, I totally sympathize with you because I can't get my head around movie star, whatever it is, who have the rights to that. It seems to me that in order to watch the golf, I've also got to have a movie star cell phone contract and a movie star internet contract, and I don't even have a TV here. I just have my computers and stuff. And so I've taken to watching, actually listening to PGA Live audio commentary. It's actually much better than the Sky TV coverage of the golf we used to have in England. The audio is brilliant. I love it. The American commentators totally know what they're talking about. And it's actually better. And I really enjoy now listening to the golf on the radio rather than watching it. Again, that's just me. But, maybe it's a good thing because it brings us back into some of the old other things that we used to have, like radio. It's pretty cool. I like it. Problem with my mum is she can't hear very well, so the radio doesn't work for her.
but she has you to
Oh
pass on the
well.
information. Yeah. So moving on to another topics and questions. You are a very interesting profile because not only you like have been on written journalism like in magazines and also have a YouTube channel, which I think it's amazing. I told you before we started, and I'm telling you again now. You have also worked inside Formula One teams,
Mm.
and you have very special Formula One friends. And I just wanted to ask you more about the work as a team manager in a Formula One team,
Mm.
because you were a Williams team manager.
I was, yeah. Actually, I used to think it at the time as well. It's very like being in the army when you're at that level, not that level, when you're at that intensity within a Formula One team running an operation there. I say that with a little bit of experience because I was in the army at the back end of my school career for 4 or 5 years, and I ended up commanding a platoon, and I mean, it was complete pure fluke and luck. But we went out on bivouac camp in the winter, actually, in Australia, and they had a thing called they had a sort of war games thing going on. Anyway, my platoon lucked into winning it, and I got this big trophy, the General Sir Ivan Mackay Trophy, for winning these quick decision exercises in a war situation. And at that point, I actually quite enjoyed the whole business of teaching cadets how to clean a rifle, how to do the regimental parades and so forth. I really enjoyed that, and I didn't go anywhere near any of that until I was team manager at Williams, and then all this, it felt very similar actually to a lot of the things that I used to do in the military, and it was it was a question of it is a question of getting the best from everybody for sure, making sure that everybody's doing what they think is the job they're best able to do, and then making sure that everybody works harmoniously. And I really enjoyed that side of it, working with good racing people, learning from them, getting their opinion, and then in some cases filtering that through if I felt I could improve a situation. If the mechanics felt that it was the wrong time to do a routine engine change on a car on a Friday night, trying to sell that to Patrick Head or Frank. Not an easy thing to do if they'd already scheduled that engine change, but it was a lot of it was that, and it was one of these things, a bit like the military again. If you're doing your job well, nobody takes any notice really. It just carries on like a well-oiled machine. But the minute something goes wrong, the spotlight is on you. So in that sense, there's a massive amount of pressure. And I suppose the other thing I remember mainly about that time was that after every race, I mean, Frank Williams had this thing of, I think it was more that he thought he needed to be seen to be this way for the benefit of the company. That he never really wanted to express a lot of pleasure or joy if he won a race. He always wanted to look as if he was immediately thinking of the next race, and things could have been better than they were, even though we won it. We didn't do a perfect job here. It was always like this sort of slightly negative atmosphere whenever we won a race. And my job up when we won a race, always I was down in Parc Ferme, making sure there were no issues with scrutineering and stuff. And so I suppose that is one of the other things I felt in doing that job at Williams, was that it was a bit anticlimactic, because when things did go really well, I don't actually remember very many times when we just sort of really celebrated and had fun and and talked about it and slapped one another on the back. It was always, oh, I've got to go and clear up the garage now, or what's happening about the cars and the flight home and the traffic jam, or whatever it was. There was always some drama. So there wasn't a lot of fun, but it was very satisfying working with a great, brilliant bunch of people. And in those days, of course, I was running a much larger group than I guess team managers do today, because it was the test team as well as the race team. So we had two test cars, and we had three race cars, two races and a spare. So it was a lot of people. I think I had about 65 people under me, and yeah, it was good stuff. I really enjoyed it. Learned a lot from them, got to say. And but I wouldn't have done it for longer than I did, because it's really intense. A bit like, as I say, being in the army. I'm not sure. I mean, you have military career people, but I don't think they actually stay on the front line for too long. They go behind the desk after a while, don't they? It was a bit like that. Not like, I didn't want to go behind the desk, but I wanted to sort of move on. I think after I won the championship with Nigel, who was a driver that I'd helped to come out of Formula 3 into Formula 1 and then to Williams and then to winning the championship, to do that with your own driver as such is an amazing feeling. And I didn't want to dilute that by then continuing to work with Prost and Patrese or Damon or whatever. I wanted to just, now I'd done it with Nigel, I just wanted to get on and do something else, because that was like the end of that chapter. And it had been a long chapter that had started in 1978 and ended in 1992.
How do you know when it's time to move on to the next chapter?
Well, as I say, I think when, in the case of winning the championship with Nigel, it was like, okay, we've done it. And I always knew he could do it, and he did it. So that was it was more the end of the book rather than the chapter, I think. And then I went to America, not necessarily because Nigel went, but because I wanted to try and do an IndyCar team. And, for various reasons that didn't happen, but that was fun time as well. Interesting time. Met some really impressive people. But with the Nigel thing, I was intensely associated with Nigel for that long period of time, from 78 to 92. So, and I suppose in that time, he occupied more than 50% of my mental capacity every day. Whether it was initially how to get him a drive, how to find the money to get him a drive, and then it was how to persuade people that he was good, and then it was how he can win a world championship. So there were all these different phases, but it all started with seeing him in Formula 3, watching the way he drove, listen to the way he spoke, trying to understand the dynamics and the mechanics of how to drive a racing car well, which I'd kind of learned quite a lot already about from Carlos Reutemann, and also from reading a lot of books and watching drivers like Jim Clark, and when I was a kid, and trying to understand what made them different. And also Sterling Moss. I got to know Sterling Moss really well and asked him a million questions about how he drove a car and what he felt and how he prescribed a corner. And I tried to apply all the stuff that I'd learned to Nigel, and found that he was doing most of that stuff naturally anyway. well, it wasn't to my astonishment because it looked that way when I saw him in Formula 3. He looked like a guy with really short corners, beautiful touch, very supple inputs. All the rates of input were exactly commensurate with what the car was doing or wanted to do. And on top of all of that, he had this incredible self-belief. Not surprising considering he was that good, but he had this incredible self-belief that he was able to do it under any circumstances, under any pressure. And he was right. He could, and he did. A lot of drivers have the talent and have the self-belief, but when it actually comes to the big point, the big pressure point with 10 seconds to go in qualifying and they're halfway around the lap and they've done 3 really good corners, but they've got 7 to go, are they going to make any sort of mistake? A lot of drivers do make a small mistake, and maybe they miss the pole by a tenth, or they miss beating their teammate by 2 tenths, or whatever it is. But in Nigel's case, the more intense the pressure, the better he drove. And I always thought that was a really interesting thing to develop and to learn from as well, from my point of view.
Yeah, it's a pleasure just listening to you talking. You know, listening you talking about Nigel. Uh, well, and you know, what was the most different things about working for Ferrari than work? You know, like because you worked for both teams.
I did,
So,
yeah. I mean, I did a different job at Ferrari,
mm-hmm,
and it was kind of it was a more difficult job in a way because I was hired by Ferrari, even though I wasn't an engineer and I'm not an engineer, to replace John Barnard at, at the Ferrari operation in the UK, where he designed and built the chassis. And we had all the carbon there, we did all the bodywork, all the suspension, everything, the chassis, everything, not the engine. That was the only thing. And and when I took over, Barnard had taken all of the people there with him to Benetton, and so I had to recruit engineers and technicians very quickly in order to get 4 cars built in, like, I think it was approximately 6 weeks, and ready for the first tire test. And it had to be done faultlessly. And the car wasn't just the Barnard car, it was a development of the Barnard car around the different dimension Goodyear tires and other changes to the regulations. So there was a lot going on. And I was in this sort of satellite world in the UK, and obviously there was Maranello, and Barnard had really disassociated himself from Maranello as far as I could see anyway. It was like he wanted it to be the English thing and very much the English ethos, and a big division between them and us, if you like. Whereas I felt we needed to be integrated much more with Maranello and what they were doing. And Cesare Fiorio, who was the team principal at that time, agreed with me. And so we did work very, very closely together. And I brought a lot of people regularly over to Maranello, and we got everything done. I mean, it was similar to Williams in the sense that to do the Williams job well, I needed to understand everybody who I was responsible for, what their talents were, what their background was, what their personalities were like, and how they worked under pressure. I needed to do all of those. And in the Ferrari job, I had to quickly assess the right people to work together in a team, to work 24/7 to get these cars built. So it was a very different thing, but it was a similar thing in some ways. But it was nice. You know, we had a good team for a while, and the car was really good for a while. And then Alan Prost threw a wobbly because Nigel was going really well in the other car, and his solution was to hire another engineer, and then it all fell apart. And you know, that always surprised me because I always imagined Alan wouldn't do that, but he did. And he kind of showed the same methodology, I think, with his own Formula One team a bit later on. It was all a bit messy and political. But I still, you know, I like Alan a lot. We get on very well, and he's a great racing driver, very underrated racing driver. But still, even though he won 4 world championships, but I think you know, had he not touched anything, we could have won more races in 1990 for sure.
Okay, great. Thanks. And you like I also wanted to ask you like who is who is the person that has supported you the most throughout your career, throughout changing careers? Because going from from journalism to maybe public relations, it's more like like it's more similar to maybe journalism, but then going to managing, as you said, like in Ferrari, like working in the UK facility, and then going
Mm.
to managing a Formula One team, going to broadcasting. Um, those are very radical, career changes at some
Hmm.
point.
Hmm.
Who is that person that supported you the most? Who trusted you the most? It can be motorsport related or it cannot be motorsport related.
Mm, it's a good question. I mean, I've got a lot of good friends, and I suppose in every part of my life, I've had to, um, I've readjusted and had different goals and gone about things different ways and worked with different people. Just trying to think really. I don't think it's been a person who's been sort of there throughout at all. But in every situation, I've always had um, very good friends and support. Uh, yeah, ultimately, I was lucky enough to meet Jim Clark just before he died and have a long chat with him when I was a kid, obviously. And he just said, if you love motor racing and you really want to work in it all your life, just do it. Don't ever give up, and always keep your head down, and you will succeed. And I've always kind of that's the mantra, I guess. I think for me, Jim Clark was probably well, for me, he was the greatest racing driver of all time, and I think that not only racing driver, but as a wonderful person, humble, kind, intelligent, very aware of motor racing and the dangers, and aware of cars and the beauty of cars. And I think he's been more influential on me perhaps than any other individual in my entire life, really, if I think about it. My mum's just tried to ring me 3 times. I'm gonna have to ring her back fairly soon, Danny. How much longer have we got to go?
Oh, I just had a last couple questions.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, last
She
couple
probably wants to
questions.
know about some tennis result.
Last couple of questions are like, your top five favorite drivers of all time. You've
Oof.
already mentioned
I'm
a
not very
couple of
good at top
those.
fives or best ofs. I can only, because there's too many to mention, so I can't really. But I'm not even going to try. You know what I think about Jim Clark, so let's just leave it at that.
Yes.
Carlos Reutemann was another, I think, very underrated, wonderful driver, very good friend of mine. Nigel, obviously. So those three guys, very, very close to my heart, always as racing drivers. But I've had so many other drivers that I've admired and love, I guess is the right word. Mario, Pedro Rodriguez, Joe Siffert, Brian Redman, right through to today. I'm a huge Max fan. I'm a Lewis fan. I like Charles Leclerc. What can I say?
I like
I'm
Charles Leclerc too.
becoming a sort of closet Carlos Sainz fan. I've always been a mate of Fernando's. I like Fernando a lot. You know, it's
Yeah.
just I think it'd be a better question is are there 5 drivers you don't like and never rated? But that even then I wouldn't be able to answer it. So no, let's pass on that
Okay.
one.
Okay. And you know, as when I close an interview, I ask what I think are very important questions, but they might come as a little bit random, and they're very important. And I'm gonna, sort of, just enjoy
Yeah.
this one because you have been living in Spain for a while, but you were
Yep.
not. But you were not born in Spain. You were born in
Beautiful Spain.
UK, and
Yep.
you lived in Australia, which I admire you a lot. Just like living in Australia, I just think I cannot. Anytime I have information about Australia, it's like nope, like no.
Yeah.
But now living in Spain, there are very important debates about food, and mostly on Twitter. Um, so you have probably enjoyed tortilla de patatas, the Spanish tortilla, and I just wanted to ask you if you preferred with onion or without onion. Because that's a really old debate. And I just try to ask as many people as I
I'm
can.
definitely without onions.
Without, okay, okay, okay.
Yeah,
So we
yeah,
know that. And yeah,
yeah.
just
Good
last,
question. A very good question, but yeah, definitely without, I'm afraid.
yeah, I also asked Mario Andretti if he liked pineapple on his pizza, but he
I do
said
too.
no.
I would always have a Hawaiian pizza. I'm totally there with Mario.
No, no,
Totally.
no, no. He said he enjoyed pineapple, but not on his pizza, sadly.
Oh, okay, right. Now I like pineapple and I like it on a pizza. And one of my favorite drinks when I was a kid, I used to live in a place called Manly, which was on the North Shore, and I used to have to get a ferry to school to Sydney, across the harbour every day. It was terrible. Um, but at Circular Quay, every evening after school, and we didn't, it was usually about 5:30, 6 o'clock. I used to get a thing called a pineapple crush. I'm sure the milk bar where they used to do it is long since gone, but they used to have literally, it was just the fresh pineapple and they just crushed the juice. I don't know how many of those I drank. Every night I used to have one. Absolutely brilliant. Love pineapple crushes. I haven't had one for a long time, actually. No ice in it. There's a thing about smoothie. I'm not into smoothies at all because I don't like crushed ice. And I think it's very difficult these days to get what I used to call, what was called a pineapple crush, which is just the pineapple into a juice
Wow.
with no ice.
I I wasn't expecting that. Okay. Thank you very much. I also, if I didn't tell you this now, my brother, you met him before we go in live.
Mm.
He would probably just kill me. If I didn't extend an invitation for you to go to the Isle of Man TT and enjoy the races there. Because he lives there.
Oh, okay. Well, I
uh,
mean, I've been to the Isle of Man a couple of times. It
yeah.
only because Nigel used to live there, and I used to spend quite a lot of time with Nigel on the Isle of Man. But I've never been there for the bike racing. I'm not sure I ever will because I'm a bit of a wuss when it comes to motorbikes on roads like that and how quick they are. I remember, I think we were at the French Grand Prix, maybe Monza, and it was like the Friday night. No, it was a Thursday, about 5 o'clock when all the teams are briefing for the practice on the Friday, and Patrick and Adrian Newey were watching Joey Dunlop or some maniac driving around the Isle of Man with an onboard camera, riding around, and they were both just completely obsessed with this thing. And I remember thinking, "Wow, yeah, right. Never going to
They're.
do that in a million years."
I just think.
Very dangerous. Yeah, I
I
love bikes. I
just.
love motorbikes, but not for I've got one. I've got a motocross Yamaha, which I love, formerly owned by Gordon Matthew Sumner, better known as Sting. There you go.
Oh,
Two
that's
owners, Sting and Peter Windsor.
that's also something I wasn't expecting to to learn today. Oh well, I just think the racers, like motorbike racers, are crazy to
Well,
drive
they're not
like the
crazy. They're
TT.
very good at what they do, and they just have to accept the dangers. If you fall
Yeah,
off, you might get something,
I
and that's very
I
sad. But
I just
they're
like
very,
safety.
very good. I mean, I've got massive respect for Marquez and that lot. Unbelievable. This
Yeah, but
doesn't even bear thinking
especially
about.
especially those who compete in the Isle of Man TT. Like
Yeah, yeah.
I just my brothers and sisters know me going to the Isle of Man and watch the races and stuff.
Wow,
And
good on you.
it's
Good for doing that. You're real fans. That's great. Good to know.
so, but yeah, but
Danny,
it's gonna take
I'm gonna have to ring my
yeah,
mum now.
yeah, sure, sure. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you so
joining
much,
us
eh?
this
Thank you.
afternoon. It has
We'll do it again, and really enjoyed it. Lovely questions
really
and lovely to talk to
thank
you.
you. I would love to do it again soon. Maybe even on your channel, it would be amazing. Thank
Yeah,
you
yeah,
so
yeah.
much. Thank you so much for your time
Brilliant.
and for your
Okay.
answers. It has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very, very much. I hope you have
Thank you.
a
Thanks for
great
asking me.
week. Okay.
Take care.
Thank you. Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Whoop. Okay. Wow. That was. ¿Por qué sigo hablando en inglés? No lo sé. En fin. Ibra. Llegaste tarde hoy. Bueno. am, gracias a todos los que habéis estado. Voy a parar.